Hello and welcome to Move the Line, presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. I'm Ryan Noonan, joined here, as always, by my friends to talk sides and totals for the divisional round here of the playoffs. Joining me, as always, Connor Allen. Connor, what's going on, buddy?
Not a whole lot. It was an interesting week last week. I sent you guys a screenshot, but usually what I like to do is I obviously play all the sides and totals and leans that we talk about on the show. And I had two left for Monday, and I hit all the rest of them. And of course, both those two lost. So it was one of those where, I got excited. I was like, because I parlay them all too, just for fun, for a couple of bucks. And, that would have obviously had some reasonable winnings in the end, and the last two lost. So it was still a profitable week on the sides and totals end, but not quite as big as I'd hoped.
It's a good week overall. I know a gentleman who had a good week too is Sharp Clark. What's going on, bud?
Speaking of which, I forget.
There we go.
Not much. It was a great week. I mean, I don't have any spicy takes like Packers money line this week, but that was my biggest bet of the year and biggest bet of my life, actually. And so that was very satisfying to have a wire-to-wire winner. And then the other games went really well as well. So it was just, I really enjoyed Wildcard Weekend, not just for winning bets, but also just watching good quarterback play from primarily CJ Stroud, Jordan Love, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Matthew Stafford, even Baker Mayfield played fairly well. And Jared Goff played pretty well too. So I think just the quality of quarterback play was more exciting than we've seen in the regular season. That was good.
You had your biggest bet of your life. The gatekeepers must be in shambles.
No, they're never in shambles.
Oh, man. You're not supposed to have good weeks, man. You're a fraud and a terrible person for being nice. You're a terrible person for being nice. Damn it.
Yeah,
I hate that about you.
I know. I got to be meaner.
Yeah. It's all just this big, just facade. I'm tired of it. Clark. No, people need to log off and get a life. But anyway, the three of us are going to continue to be here every Wednesday. This is 4 p.m. Eastern on our 4for4 Bets YouTube channel. Whether you're watching us because you like us or you hate us, we appreciate it. Subscribe, like all the things before you leave. We appreciate it. The podcast is available later on in the evening, wherever you listen to podcasts. Free content, supporting it goes a long way in helping us do the things that we want to do here at 4for4 in terms of tools, content, all those things. The likes and all those things go a long way in helping us. So please do that. If you like props, Connor, myself, John Hyslop on Fridays, same YouTube channel, same podcast feed, Fridays at 3 p.m. Eastern. Come back. We will have props for you there as well. If you want to get the official plays, you want to get access to all that we do, you need the betting subscription at 4for4. It is obviously massively discounted because we are coming up to the end of the season. The subscription takes you to the end of February, so you will get some NBA, you'll get some MMA from us as well, along with obviously the rest of the NFL season. But next season, you want to maybe check us out. This will give you a little bit of an idea of what it looks like. It gets you access to all the articles, tools, rankings, projections, like I said, covering all the sports. And really the subscriber Discord is the crown jewel of the sub. That's where all the official plays are pushed out. Great conversations all the time. Very like-minded community who's always looking to get down and find an edge. Definitely, I think, worth your time. You can go to 4for4.com/plans to check it out. It is just $19.99 for the rest of the season. Super cheap. Gets you access and get a sense of what we are doing over there. And I think you will enjoy it. All right, guys. We had, Clark talked about it, good football last weekend. Season ended for a bunch of teams, though. Browns, Dolphins, Cowboys, Rams, Steelers, Eagles, all packed it up. We're going to touch on the teams here shortly that knocked them out. But before we do, I want to see if you guys have any thoughts or any takeaways about those teams that were eliminated, whether it was game specific that we saw, things that we should see moving forward, because I think some of these teams have some pretty massive conversations to have, whether it's, coaching changes, quarterback changes. Again, anything you saw on the field or looking ahead into in the offseason here. Clark, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the Eagles. I mean, I obviously was not as high on them last year as most people. So maybe that colors my perception of them. But I think their season this year was simply a result of heightened expectations that were not justified in the first place. It's if a team goes 11-6, and granted they had an embarrassing playoff loss, but even in that playoff loss, they were banged up. AJ Brown matters a ton. But a season like that is typically considered a fairly good season by most standards. But because of how good they were last year, at least in the record, against a really easy schedule, and then they had 2 easy playoff games, and then they played their best game of the year in the Super Bowl, it led them to think that they were the quality of team that will be perennial Super Bowl contenders. They paid Jalen Hurts as if he was an elite quarterback. And then they tried to run it back, and then they started out doing well, and then they failed down the stretch. And that is the ultimate example of a team that just fails to meet expectations. They have a lot to fix. Their play calling was terrible. Their defensive effort was terrible. And I don't think that they're close. I don't think that this was a minor blip where they just got to get healthy, get AJ Brown back, and they'll get it all together. I think, Jason Kelce retiring is massive. It might even take away the strength of the brotherly shove. Jalen Hurts' inability to run this year, whether it was injury or just stylistic or whatever, their offense was not working. Their defense was terrible. And I think they're much further away from being a contender than they thought they were to start the year. And I'm not sure what the solution is for them. So I'd be fine if I was an Eagles fan if they fired Sirianni and started over. I don't think that this is a patch the holes and kind of move on kind of situation. I think this is a serious deficiency that they have on that team.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the Jalen Hurts thing is, and I think you made a good point. In a tweet around, like, we just see in terms of quarterbacks on the second contracts, kind of the conversation I've had with a lot of Bears fans. Connor and I are here locally in Chicago, though not Bears fans, and we're taking the temperature of people. And Dan in the chat, is this the season of lies already starting with the Bears trading the first pick? The conversation is, do you think that, for me, hey, do you think that Fields is a guy that can win on a second contract? Because that's really where you're going to have to be. Can you build a winner around him on the second deal? It's just really hard. Historically, you just have a few outliers. Tom Brady, who just consistently took less than market, average to be able to allow the team to do that, and exceeded expectations all the time. There's just a handful that have done it in the last 20, 25 years. The Hurts thing, like, he was clearly hurt. They had cluster injuries, at times at receiver, and I think that mattered too. You make some points that I think are interesting. I mean, defensively, we knew that they weren't going to be able to hold up to like this insane sack rate that they had the year before, because their pressure rate didn't even really match it. So that came crashing back down to earth. They were picked apart. Like, you look in hindsight, like, linebackers devalue position across the league, but they had a couple of good ones last year. They didn't this year. Had massive injuries where they were rotating fourth and fifth linebackers out. People were so excited that they signed Shaq Leonard, couldn't even get on the field. Was really kind of a liability when he did. So maybe they addressed some things in the middle of the field differently. I think they're probably closer than you do. I do think that the Hurts obviously couldn't. I just think he couldn't run. Like, we didn't see the stuff outside the tackle box that we saw last year, where he would like extend plays and extend yards, put his shoulder down and run. Like, he just didn't have it, and he would slide, quicker than normal. I think that was an element that they were severely missing. But yeah, I mean, it's the question about roster construction outside of the second contract that I think is going to be interesting to them. Connor, what are your takeaways with some of the 6 that were eliminated here?
Yeah, it's interesting because most of the teams left that we haven't talked about are significant underperformers. Like you talked about the Dolphins, I think the Cowboys, the Eagles, but an overperformer. I mean, the Rams are really interesting. And I think they were a great litmus test this year for how much star players matter. And then how much, if 1 or 2 ancillary guys can step up, like, you have a good team all of a sudden. Matthew Stafford is, basically a kingmaker. Puka Nacua stepped up in a big way and, broke through all the metrics, any of that, like, that didn't even matter. And then their defense, just Aaron Donald made plays and they played a little bit better. They played like kind of passive defense and kept the ball in front of him and just tried to do their best. And it like resulted in a, I guess, good outcome here. A playoff appearance, I think, is really strong relative to expectations for them. So it's just something to keep in mind, I think, going forward for us handicapping and just everyone else looking at it. The Dolphins are really interesting too, because it outlined the fragility without, a full receiving core for Tua Tagovailoa. Just Tyreek Hill couldn't get it done against a good defense. And on the other side, their defense, I think, could actually still be good next year. It's just that they were injured the entire year. Right when they finally started getting healthy, like 4 more guys got injured. So I think that's something to kind of hold in our back pockets as well. And lastly, the Browns. I mean, it's really tough. They have a good defense, but they're not very flexible given what they have just with Deshaun Watson. Joe Flacco looks like the best quarterback that they've had in, I don't even know, 5 years, like a long time. And that it's like a 6-game sample where he ends it with throwing multiple picks and looking terrible. So, I don't know. They got a lot of decisions on their hands, and it's something that's going to be a really, really tough team for me next year. I already know it because I don't have a ton of faith based on what we've seen from Watson this year.
Yeah, no, those are good points. The Dallas situation, I think, is interesting. Like, with the coaching change there, it seemed imminent. Like it really didn't matter. It's one of those scenarios with like even Dak being an MVP candidate. It was all going to just come down to what do you do in the 60 minutes chunk of time that you're going to get in that whatever playoff game is. Maybe you get 2 60-minute chunks, but like what happens in the one? It went pretty poorly, which is obviously a very difficult way to grade anyone's performance. But if you're a Cowboys fan, easy for us to say we're not in your shoes, having to watch yet another playoff disappointment. It's been pretty tough. But yeah, the Brown situation's wild. Pittsburgh, I kind of touched on last week. Like, what do you do at quarterback? You made a choice with a healthy Kenny Pickett, who was in his second year, that you wanted to roll with Mason Rudolph in a playoff game. What do you do next year? Just open competition? Like, that's not great, but
yeah, I mean, Mason Rudolph was better than Kenny Pickett this year. Like, I know it was only 4 games, and there were some favorable defensive matchups for sure, but he was getting the ball out, and like accurately, he was getting the ball to his playmakers, and the Steelers have playmakers. So something Kenny Pickett wasn't really able to do when he was in there. I get why they stuck with him. I just don't think that Rudolph is a long-term solution.
Yeah. But it feels like at best that's a competition. Like Rudolph's not probably walking into they had Rudolph at 3. That's what their team had in terms of like their player eval in season, was they had him behind Trubisky, right? So like I can't think that they feel super good about just passing the keys to Mason Rudolph and be like, oops, sorry, we messed up for a couple of years. Here you go. You get a shot to give it a go. But yeah, interesting conversations for all those teams, some of the iconic franchises in the sports.
I will say the one that I'm least worried about in the short term is Miami. I think their offensive scheme, and they should have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle back next year. I don't know how many more years Tyreek Hill's going to play, but with those guys and Devon Achane, the speed that those guys bring to the field and what McDaniel was able to do with them, they negated having a beat up offensive line all year and still put together one of the better offenses in the league. And then on defense, they were starting to play really, really well, and then suffered just an insurmountable amount of defensive injuries. I'll get that one out on defensive front and in the secondary and linebackers. So I think if they get healthy on defense, get everyone back, I think they are a team that doesn't need to blow anything up. The big question is how much do they want to pay Tua, or do they want to let him play on the 5th year? But I think that's a team that should be thinking, okay, we're right back in this. Like, this is our window. Some of those other teams, have bigger questions.
Yeah, it should be. The offseason is almost here. We talked about pre-show. Like all of a sudden, some of the work stops, and all of a sudden, there's like, wait, there's gonna be new work to be done because the offseason is right around the corner. But for now, 4 games to break down, 4 divisional weekends, and we will start with the first game on Saturday. 2 on Saturday with the number 1 seeds, and then 2 great games on Sunday as well. Houston on the road in Baltimore. We were all pro Houston coming into the season, but not host and win a playoff game pro. It was more just pushing towards their win total, maybe 6-7 wins. If CJ Stroud was the guy, we have that answer. He is very much the guy. They are now back in Baltimore, where the season began in week 1. We have the top seeded Ravens coming off of that little rest. They opened up here as an 8.5-point favorite. Been bet out to 9.5, minus 110 across the market. There are some potential weather concerns here that I think have impacted the total, which is down to 43.5, pretty significant after opening at 46. Clark, I will let you get started here. Stroud and the Texans in Baltimore. What do you got?
Yeah, this number, the total and spread combination is disrespectful to CJ Stroud. I mean, I get it, weather can impact scoring, but CJ Stroud has done nothing short of be an elite quarterback this year. And I feel confident that he is the guy. He is him. He is the next competitor in the AFC who's going to be in the mix with Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence each year. Like, there's going to be these guys, and he's one of them. And I think that if you look at the Baltimore defense, which is admittedly very tough. I mean, the Browns defense was tough, but most of their dominant performances had come against bad offenses. And so I was a little bit skeptical in that one of whether or not they could stop a quarterback like CJ Stroud. The Ravens have done some damage against some good offenses, particularly Detroit, Miami, and San Francisco. But the thing is, Detroit, Miami, and San Francisco are picture-perfect examples of successful schemes with basically hiding the quarterback. Like, the quarterback is fine, but it's all about the scheme and getting the ball to the weapons. And the Ravens have disrupted those types of offenses. The Texans are the exact opposite. They are elite quarterback play, throwing downfield and punishing the defense. And I think that's a different style. And I think the Ravens might have their hands full with CJ Stroud in this one, even without Noah Brown, even without Tank Dell. CJ Stroud has actually been fairly resilient to losing individual weapons. His really bad game came in the elements against the Jets with no weapons, basically. I think he started with just Nico, and then Nico got hurt. And that was a disaster of a game. But I think against probably the best defense in the NFL in the elements, I think it's a little bit different than, not quite as bad weather, and then a Ravens defense that's not quite as good as the Jets in terms of playmakers downfield. So I think the Texans offense is live here, but weather may impact it. The Ravens are a very good team, but I also think that Lamar, he struggles a little bit with weather. He played well against the Rams this year, but he's had some games in the past where the weather has caused some fumbled snaps and some mistakes like that, where he gets a little careless with the ball. He's also been more reliant on downfield passing this year than he has in previous years. And so weather is just going to impact that type of offense a bit more. I think they're going to miss Keaton Mitchell on this one. But if the Ravens can establish the run against a good Texans run defense, then I think
we freezing on?
Was that me or is that Clark?
I think it's Clark.
All right. Clark got blown up there.
He's going to come back in with middle of his Texans run D take. They're good. Their run D is very, very good. I think what he was touching on too, Connor, which is interesting, is regardless of really who they've played, how they've got here has been based off of Stroud's ability to, in just consistently, regardless of who's in and out of the lineup, generate explosive pass plays through the air. They are second in explosive pass rate on the season. This is strength versus strength, though, as Clark was touching on too. When Baltimore's in their base defense, which is a look that they're in like 73% of the snaps so far this season, they've allowed the lowest rate of explosive pass plays on the year. So we need basically CJ Stroud's best ball of the season here, I think, to keep it close. But it's within the range of outcomes as long as the elements get too crazy here. What are your thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, so I kind of agree with Clark in a couple of different ways. So the biggest angles that I thought, and that's what leads me towards Houston at +9.5, is that their run defense is good, but not only are they good, they're good against RPOs. They're good against out of the gun. So against RPOs, they're allowing less than 3 yards per carry. And out of the gun, they're still number one in yards per carry allowed. So that kind of leads me to the only bad games they played has basically been against Indianapolis twice. Like those are the most rushing yards they played, and it's been twice. And against Indianapolis, that's the only team out of the entire season that's basically been able to thwart them. So can Baltimore keep something up that's similar? I mean, maybe, but I really haven't been all that impressed with their run game regardless, to be honest, which sounds a little bit weird, but it's not. It doesn't look the same as it did with Greg Roman, which I know Greg Roman catches a lot of flack for not being able to pass the ball well, which totally warranted, but the run game was at least somewhat creative. They were able to leverage a few more things. I haven't really been all that impressed. So I think that's a pretty big edge for Houston here, which also puts a lot of pressure on Lamar, a guy who has, I believe it was the Football Outsiders guy said, the worst DYAR in playoff history so far as quarterback. Really just hasn't been all that good. Now he gets Houston, though, 23rd in explosive pass rate, not really all that good. Play a lot of zone. And so I think that's kind of an issue here, is that I expect Lamar to have success passing the ball, but I don't expect them to run the ball really well and consistently, which I think kind of hurts their ability to maintain and sustain a lead here, unless they're just going bananas literally the entire game, which is possible. But again, I just don't think that that's really consistent here. And then on the other side, the real reason I like Houston is that I expect the Houston offense to have success here. And so a couple of different reasons why. So they play zone 71% of the time, which is one of the highest rates in the league, as well as too high. And both those marks are, pretty well above average. Stroud against those looks, 69% completion rate, over 8.7 yards per attempt against zone. And then against too high, 67% completion rate, 11 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Baltimore, second in pressure rate in the league. Stroud, fourth best completion rate under pressures, ninth best completion rate fourth best completion yards per attempt under pressure. Still good marks against pressure, good against zone. I understand that he doesn't have his full arsenal of weapons, but I expect them to move the ball here. Not to mention this Baltimore run defense is not nearly as good as their pass defense. I mean, they're 21st in success rate. So it's really one of those things that I think they can move the ball, maybe not routinely, but there will be good plays come by. And the other side, Baltimore will have some struggles running the ball here. So I think that Houston +9.5. I think that Houston's team total at 16.5 is a little bit low. Maybe even the over. I think there is a range of outcomes where maybe Baltimore drops like 35 on them just because they're gunning the ball downfield. Odell comes to life, things like that. But I also expect Houston to push back at least pretty well. But I think all of those are in play. I put a little sprinkle on each one, but I think that they're all solid looks.
Look, I'll kick it back to you. We lost you for, I think, the end of your thoughts there. But yeah, this is an interesting thing here too, which I really just want to mention real quick. This happens all the time. This used to be a real, like, it would happen often because we have this scenario where we have these teams we haven't seen. And it's interesting to like try to check yourself to not be a prisoner of the moment where this team has performed well enough to advance. And they are obviously coming off of probably some good play down the stretch to get them into the playoffs. And then they go ahead and they win. And now they get the team that again has to play meaningful football in a couple of weeks. And I'm trying to be really cognizant of evaluating and handicapping these games and not being a prisoner of the moment, especially with the 2 Saturday games, because we have the teams that are coming off of a bye that didn't have to really play in week 18 either. But I think both of you are making really good points. And I think kind of solidifying where I am on some of this pro Houston stuff that I have. But go ahead, I'll kick it back to you and let you kind of round up your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm with Connor. I'm on the Texans here. The reason is I don't see a huge matchup advantage either way. That's kind of what I was breaking down earlier. My pure numbers make it 7.5. So I think there's a little bit of value there. It's not, the 8 and 9 aren't huge numbers, but they're enough for me to make the bet. And I think when you're talking about not being the prisoner of the moment, you have to consider the context, right? This isn't a team where we have a bunch of evidence and they've been playing outlier good football for the last couple games. This is a brand new team, a brand new quarterback, coach, offense coordinator combination that has played its best football in the last few weeks. And when we see this, where rookies take time to ramp up and then really play their best at the end of the year, it's typically a good sign that they underwent growth. They got comfortable with who they are and what they do, what they're capable of. So in this case, I actually do think you should weight the performance in the playoffs as part of your input for this game, because it's a meaningful part of who CJ Stroud is and who this offense is. So for that reason, I do think that this number is a little high. I mean, look at it this way. Who's better, the Steelers or the Texans?
Texans.
Okay. And then who's better, Bills or Ravens?
It's a question that we might have to get. Right now, you would say the Ravens.
It's interesting. Right? But the gap between the Steelers and Texans is large. The gap between the Ravens and Bills, whichever way you put it, is tiny. And, we were giving 10 last week to the Steelers against the Bills. And now we're giving 9.5 to the Texans against the Ravens. I just think that it's too generous. It implies that the Ravens dominating the 49ers was the definition of who they are when they were 5.5 point underdogs in that game. And I bet them as underdogs in that game because 5.5 was too many. But that doesn't mean that they are better than the 49ers because they won one game. They're still the Ravens. And in that game, their offense actually struggled quite a bit. They had some very short fields due to turnovers by Purdy. It wasn't a very dominant performance by their offense. So I think it's just giving too much credit to the Ravens for what they've shown on the field so far this year.
Yeah. There's also 3. So this is the first of 3 rematches, I believe, on the week. I don't know if you mentioned that already, but it's one of those things where this was week 1. I mean, this was CJ Stroud's first game. Tank Dell was not even a thing. It's Bobby Sloak was calling his first game ever. I think almost all of that, and even early in the season, it's been kind of a roller coaster. And I think it's expected though. I mean, you imagine literally the Texans playing a game against the Ravens, who we didn't think were going to be very good, but wound up being one of the best units in the league. And now, in week 1 in their first game for all those different guys, of course, in hindsight, they're going to struggle in that first game, but now you're getting them where they've been playing way better. They've kind of been finding their rhythm. I think that the expectations should be way higher. And it's one of those things where we saw it kind of last week with the Eagles and the Bucks, that just because we saw, something happen before with this matchup doesn't mean that the current iteration is what we can expect again from a usage standpoint, from, a play calling standpoint. I think there are a lot of iterations that need to be taken with context there. So I think it's just something worth noting and evaluating independently as well as, together to see if it has any merit to see what they did last time.
Yeah, all very good points. As you know, and Connor can attest to, we've watched some football together over the last couple of years. My brain is broken with the way that I watch games now because of sweating tackle props, which is just how I watch. I'm looking at pre-snap stuff, trying to see where guys are lined up. Sometimes seeing if guys are on the field, just trying to look at things, seeing things a little bit different. Which I know is probably very strange. You typically look at the ball, but I noticed something. And I picked it up around the second half, that the Texans were doing something very different with their safeties pre and post snap. We got animals dropping in. We got cats coming in. So I noticed that the Texans were doing something very, very different post snap with their safeties. And then that actually was kind of when you started to see things spiral for Joe Flacco. And then I found shout out to PFF, who's had a rough day. PFF's, JJ Watt dragging
so many
PFF.
strays out there, man.
Just catching strays. PFF Sam. Like I love Sam, but Sam's incredibly smart. I love listening to him talk football. Tough scene, with getting dragged on McAfee and such. But anyway, shout out PFF. There was an article actually kind of capturing some of what we were seeing with our eyes. And it was something that was very, very new to how the Texans have been playing. And part of that is because they are also getting healthy on that side of the ball, which is something that they did not have early in the season. They were dealing with injuries as well in the secondary, both like their top defensive ends, Will Anderson Jr. and Jonathan Grenard missed a bunch of time, like Sheldon Rankins in and out of the lineup. Rotations at linebacker were kind of tough to suss out early. So now they are healthy. They got everyone in their spots. Desmond King was out for a while, has been locked down, in the slot. Anyway, they started switching pre-snap or post-snap, middle of the field changes. And when you saw early, they did nothing post-snap, and they got cooked by Flacco. And they actually broke it down once they started making this change. So early in the game, when they didn't do anything, Flacco had an 88.5% completion percentage, 9.5 yards per attempt, and had like a normal time to throw. And the second half, when they started messing around, his grade fell to a 36 passing grade, 55% completion percentage. That's where both the pick sixes came in. 3 yards per attempt, down from 9.5 yards per attempt to 3 yards per attempt. They didn't score, and his average time to throw was almost 3 seconds. That's a big time problem. Now, this is new. This is not something that the Texans have done all season, and that kind of speaks to them getting a little bit healthy. Early in the season, they were like 30th in the league in post-snap movement at the safety position in cover 2, but they lead the league over the last like 5 weeks in doing this. And this is something that Lamar has massively struggled with throughout his career. Anytime there's any type of like safety post-snap movement, and it makes sense, right? Just like it's just like movement on the offensive side where you're able to kind of just see the guys are lining up and having to account for like pre-snap motion. It totally changes the landscape. Lamar's really struggled. His passing grade is really poor. It's like 35th out of 51 quarterbacks with 100 dropbacks over the last 3 years. He is like bottom 10 in completion percentage, the 10th most turnover worthy plays. Like all this stuff is a problem for Lamar. So it just kind of adds to the 9.5 is probably not being the prisoner of the moment. It's probably just too big of a number for the way the Texans are playing right now on both sides of the ball. So I think we all kind of like Stroud. I think the defense isn't really getting the credit that it deserves as well. So I think 9.5 is probably the right side here. I think 8.5 was like probably pretty popular. They wanted to move off of 8.5 because you kind of take the teaser leg out. But I'm not even super excited about Baltimore at 2.5. I think the Texans are alive. Now I'm not playing money line, but I think they're there alive. I think this is not like I think it's an exciting time to be part of that franchise. And I think they're going to show up pretty well as long as I think the elements don't get too wonky here. So defense matters, guys. All right. You guys gave all your thoughts for that one. We'll move on to, again, another great one where we don't want to be prisoner of the moment. We had a team coming off of a great win, Green Bay on the road in San Francisco. I felt really good about my Green Bay plus 7.5 ticket pretty early in that game. Not as good as Clark with his money line play. Took a stand here. Great job handicapping that and why he was backing the Packers on the money line. And man, that was a wild game. But we saw some 10s in the market here briefly. This is now San Francisco minus 9.5 across the market. Pretty healthy total here as well, Connor. 50.5. What are your thoughts here on Packers and Niners?
Yeah, I was just really surprised at how the Cowboys consistently ran the ball on first down. And I think that over the past few years, you could run the ball very easily on the Packers. And, but I think that's still true in some senses. But the biggest edge we're seeing right now is just the Packers' inability to defend the pass on first down. A lot of that's with them, at least in my opinion, and a non-ball knowing defensive guy. They play a lot of base basically, and their linebackers end up, in a lot of disadvantageous spots. We saw it multiple times with CeeDee Lamb. We've seen it throughout the season. But if we look at this Packers defense on first down this season, allowing 8.6 yards per attempt, which is 26th, 71% completion rate, which is 28th, dead last in success rate, 58% success rate, a lot of first down. Now we're matching that up against the 49ers, who are very, very, agnostic to playing against their matchups. Like, they will run the piss out of the ball if they have to. They'll pass a bunch if they have to. And I think this matchup calls for a lot of early down passes here. Brock Purdy on first down this season leads the league in passing yards, leads the league in yards per attempt, completion rate, and success rate in literally all those categories here. And then on top of all this, you have a Packers defense that's not very good at defending passes over the middle, allowing 9.9 yards per attempt and 71% completion rate. So it's like all of these things here adding up to, it's a big advantage for the 49ers. If they're going to attack the middle of the field, if they're going to push the ball downfield early in the game, I think that the Niners score pretty handily here. Now, the reason that I'm not, pounding the Niners minus 9.5 into oblivion is because I think that the Packers might be able to score here too, because we saw them last week. We knew that one of the biggest edges would be in the running game. I thought that maybe the Cowboys would be able to figure something out, or maybe load the box, force Jordan Love to do some things. They had no idea. The Packers ran 12 personnel, one of the highest rates in the league, or highest rates for the season, and they just ran the ball every single play so successfully. Aaron Jones wasn't even touched on some plays. I don't think they're going to be able to do that against the 49ers, but still, 49ers are like 20th in success rate so far against the run. They're not awesome. So it's like one of those things where I think that the Packers are going to be able to run the ball at least reasonably well. And Jordan Love, and the way that Matt LaFleur schemed up, everything's been really impressive. So I think they'll have some success passing the ball too. So it's like one of those things where I lean towards the over, but I think 49ers team total at 29.5, 30.5, both very strong here. I mean, I just am willing to go back to the well here, even after we saw them just give the Cowboys a lot of problems, that the 49ers are going to figure out a lot more against this Packers defense the Cowboys did. So that's my favorite angle.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that too. I mean, you could run on the Packers. Dallas struggled to run the ball all season. And then that was really off the table pretty early in last week's game, because, the game just got kind of out of whack, and then you forced Dak to play one-handed, and that just very problematic. I just don't think that if the Niners can avoid falling behind massively early like Dallas did, I think they're going to give him more trouble and be able to run the ball here. Clark, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I don't have a strong angle on this one. I really like what Connor was saying about how the 49ers offense is built to basically punish the Packers defense. I completely agree with that. And I think one of the keys that I look at when there's a big spread like this and the underdog has a good offense is, does the opposing offense make mistakes? And the answer for the 49ers this year has been no. They when good defenses force them to make mistakes, like the Ravens did, they make mistakes. But against bad defenses, they're just so methodical. Their throws are so low risk. I mean, it's not based on an elite quarterback hitting tight windows and evading pressure. It's built on point and shoot. That guy has 5 yards of separation. Here you go, buddy. And that should work against Green Bay. And so when that's the case, and they're laying almost 10 against a really good explosive offense that, I don't want to be sweating out a backdoor cover with a Niners minus 9.5 ticket late in this one, because I really do think Jordan Love is that guy that can put those points up. So this is kind of like the market got this one right, in my opinion. I do think that the 49ers are a little bit underrated, but as much as I love the Packers and as much variance as they have, and similar to what we're saying about CJ Stroud, I think Jordan Love playing his best football towards the end of the year is signal, not variance. It's enough to keep me off of the 49ers in this one. And I've got futures on both teams, more exposure to the 49ers, but I'll be rooting for the 49ers to win so that they can keep that future alive.
I think Connor's point's correct. I think probably my favorite look would be, even though it's a massive number, would be Niners team total, because I don't know, when the Packers bring 5 or more, they allow the highest success rate in the league, 57.4%. The problem is, if you allow Purdy to sit clean and don't bring pressure, he's going to pick you apart too, because they can win in so many different spots. Where again, we knew, okay, Dallas's offense had a ceiling, maybe not the ceiling that the Niners did. They could go to more guys than CeeDee Lamb, but we knew it felt like even the broadcast was forcing it down our throat. There was something wrong there. They got to get CeeDee involved. Look at the two of them talking. Why would they be talking so much? It was just the strangest thing. It was they're teammates. They probably talk a lot. I don't know. It just was a really weird thing. But obviously the Niners, part of the appeal there and why they're so good is there's so many ways that they could beat you. So I don't think that the Packers defense, even if you think that they somehow have found something and they're going to be better. It's probably true. They did a great job, like really offensive line wise, of like neutralizing Micah Parsons as well. One pressure for Parsons in a playoff game. Kind of talked about that. It's kind of our handicap is how strong the offensive line has been in terms of keeping Love clean. And when he does get pressure, he attacks deep. It's really hard to do against a front like the Niners that have, again, more ways than one to win. So game planning specifically versus just kind of game planning to shut down one guy, I think is going to be a problem here too. So yeah, Niners team total. I lean Niners 9.5. I do kind of agree with Clark. It's probably the right number. I imagine you get a good amount of buyback if we push to 10 again. So yeah, even if we're pushing to 30, that's probably the right side on the team total for the Niners. So
yeah,
I just want them to advance, to be honest. I think that they should probably be in the Super Bowl, and I kind of want to see them in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of offense in the game. My worry about the total being above 50 is both teams can really draw out drives. Like,
for sure,
if we get to halftime and both teams have touched the ball twice each, I wouldn't be overly shocked. So that's kind of keeping me off the total here.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I think we're going to see too. I think we saw it in a couple games with the Niners, but basically that's like they start under center with like CMC in the single back, and then they, audible to basically do a shotgun and then like put CMC like in the slot. Like, I think that is going to give the Packers an unbelievable amount of problems just based on how their defense runs. So I'm willing to put, a couple bucks that we'll see that on the first drive. And I would be pretty surprised if we don't. And if we do see that, I think it's a pretty good signal for the Niners kind of executing what at least the advantages that we see. But either way, I think it's gonna be a great game. And like you said, Love is, Love is legit. And I, was not a believer always, but I think being able to adjust to the new information that we've seen with the young receiving core and how LaFleur is like, it's been scheming things up really well too. Guys are open. It's all clicking for him.
Yeah, I think Kyle Shanahan versus Joe Barry is one of the bigger coaching mismatches we've seen this playoffs. So.
Yeah. Sometimes it is that simple, I think. All right, next, not have this in my playoff bingo matchup heading into the season. Tampa Bay on the road in Detroit. It's opened with the Lions as a 6-point favorite. It's been bat out to 6.5. Total is held steady at 48.5. Is Connor touched on a rematch from week 6. Pretty underwhelming. 20-6 win for the Lions. Again, like I didn't watch the week 6 game thinking like this is a precursor to an inevitable playoff rematch, but here we are. Some feel good stuff on both sides. The Lions is awesome, capturing their first playoff win in decades. Baker Mayfield managed to hold off Kyle Trask over the summer to earn a job that he's probably going to have heading into 2024. So good vibes all around. Clark, I'll kick it to you. Let you get started for Bucks and Lions. What do you got?
Yeah, in the last 3 games, let's take a look at the Bucks offense. 3 games ago, they entered the fourth quarter against New Orleans with 0 points. And then in the final week of the regular season, they scored 9 points against the Panthers with a million opportunities. And then last week against Philadelphia, they exploded on offense. And both of those games were meaningful for the Bucks. They were both win-and in playoff games. Like these mattered, and they were terrible on offense. And so the question is, was Baker Mayfield hurt in those 2 games and playing through injury, playing gritty and just kind of dealing with it, and then was healthy for the Eagles game? Or is Baker Mayfield just not that good and the Eagles defense gave up and he capitalized with some big plays, against tacklers that had no interest in tackling? Obviously that's an exaggeration and it's somewhere between the two. He has been dealing with injury, but I think how you answer that question matters, because if you peg it on the Eagles defense and say that, well, they just weren't ready for that game, whatever, they weren't motivated, something's going wrong with them, then there's no reason to think the Bucs offense is any good right now. But if you're saying that it was just a 2-game lull for the offense when Baker Mayfield was hurt, then I think you can dig back further and see that they were playing fairly well down the stretch. Baker Mayfield was throwing the ball deep. And then last week, we saw a high pass rate over expectation from Dave Canales, which is something we haven't seen during the season. And so if all that is signal and it shows that they're comfortable with Mayfield and that he's healthy, then I think the Bucs offense has a chance to capitalize against this Lions defense. But I think if I had to choose one of those 2 things, I would choose against it. The Lions defense is underrated at this point. They're finally healthy. Aleem McNeil's back. Their secondary is healthy. And people just keep talking about them like some kind of defense you can just pass all over and do whatever you want. But what I saw from Matthew Stafford last week was an elite quarterback making elite throws. Like 5 or 6 of those throws were not throws Baker Mayfield has in his arsenal, even on a good day. And so I think they're going to need to get an A+ level game from Baker Mayfield to put up points against the Lions. And then on the other side of the ball, let's look at the Bucs defense. They've been really good down the stretch. I mean, they really did well against the Saints. They completely shut out the Panthers. And then they completely shut down the Eagles, even though they didn't have A.J. Brown. Still, holding them to 9 points is impressive. And if you look at who they've had injured over the back half of the season, they've been dealing with multiple injuries to key guys virtually every game. And in the games where they haven't been injured, they've done really well. Remember the Trevor Lawrence game? I think the Jags had 0 points heading into the fourth quarter of that game. So I think the Bucs defense is healthy and good. And I think that the way that they blitz negates the offensive line strength like we saw against the Eagles, because no matter how good your offensive line is, you can only block 5 guys. You're not getting offensive linemen putting up 2 guys, right? So if you're rushing 6, you have an advantage on the defense no matter how good the line is. So I think the Bucs are going to blitz again here, and Jared Goff handled it fairly well the first time and has handled it well against Minnesota as well. But I think that Ben Johnson can only do so much, and just a few blitzes can get to Jared Goff, and that can make the difference on that side of the ball. I saw a tweet that said last week Jared Goff, when not pressured, was 22 of 22 for whatever yards and touchdowns. And I was like, I wonder what his total stats were. And sure enough, 22 of 27 with 3 sacks. And so every time he was pressured, it was a negative play for the Lions. And I think the Bucs are going to get a little more than 8 pressures on them than the Rams got. So I like both defenses in this matchup. And even though it's indoors on Ford Field, the total is just too high for a Bucs game. I think I did the math, and it was like 3 or 4 games all year for the Bucs have gone over 48.5. And so it's giving the Lions a lot of credit, giving the over game script a lot of credit. And even last week, we saw with a completely offensive game still go under the total because, just things happen. Like you have to keep up the pace of scoring points to cover a total this high. And I just think that one or both of these offenses are going to struggle to meet it. So I think the spread is right, and I like under on the total.
Yeah, good takes there for sure. I like that. You touched on the pass rate over expectation thing versus the Eagles, and it is interesting to see if that was like, all right, like we have our opponent agnostic game plan that we stick to, and we don't shift based off of strength or weaknesses of the defense, or is it something where they're like, hey, look, the Eagles, this is how you can kind of attack them, and it was encouraging to see. I guess we'll find out, because that's kind of what I would expect them to do again, because the Detroit run D is pretty solid. Better even than the Eagles run D, and maybe not as bad in terms of pass defense, but still definitely how you beat the Lions. We've been targeting them in props all season, and in good matchups we know this has been hard for them to keep up on. So, yeah, I think that it is going to be interesting to see if they keep it up. Now, again, to your point, the question around Baker is still, even though they went deeper down the field, took some more shots, ran more on early downs, he's still like negative 5% completion percentage over expectation. So we're not dealing with the quarterback that's all of a sudden someone who's way different than who we thought he was. He still will miss layups. But again, like Jared Goff cooked in that game too, Connor. Again, part of it was running back injury situations, but in the first matchup, he absolutely lit him up. So even in the face of a lot of blitzing, he kind of carved him up. Be interested to see what adjustments are made there. But what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I'm far from a Mayfield fan, but also against the Eagles. That game wound up being closer than it should have. Honestly, like the Bucs from snap to snap dominated that game. Mike Evans dropped a touchdown and another bomb. He could have easily had like 120 yards in that game. So I don't think all of that was on Mayfield, but he definitely didn't look, he looked hurt, in the previous games prior to that. But I do want to add on to what Clark said here specifically against the Bucs blitzing. So the Bucs blitzed over 60% of the time last week. And then against in this matchup previously, they pressured Jared Goff on 12 of his 48 dropbacks. On those 12 48 dropbacks, he completed just 2 of 8 passes for 23 yards. Was not very good. Took 3 sacks, had a 4-yard scramble. And then if you zoom out and look at his whole season, his splits are super interesting. So obviously there's 4 different ways to look at it. So it's a team gets pressure, a team blitzes and gets pressure, a team blitzes and doesn't get pressure, and a team just gets pressure without blitzing. So there's like those 4 different buckets. If you look at Jared Goff in those buckets, as long as he's not pressured, he's great. He's great against the blitz with no pressure. He's totally fine, which makes sense because if they blitz and don't get home, like Goff easily picks them apart. But if they blitz and do get home, he's a cupcake. It's like 40% completion rate. It's a complete disaster. And so I expect them to go blitz heavy again here, but I think that kind of plays into what the Lions are going to do too. So we saw in their first matchup, so David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs was not active. David Montgomery only played through 2 quarters, but in the first quarter and a half, they still had 12 dropbacks to 7 rush attempts. They were 13% passer over expectation in that game. The Lions were against the Bucs. So I think that regardless, even though we have Gibbs, even though we have Montgomery, I think we're going to see probably a little bit more passing here, probably quicker passes as well. He had one of the lowest time to throw of the season for him. He had one of the lowest ADOTs of the season for him the last time they met. He had 44 pass attempts in a game that they won 20-6, where they never trailed. I mean, like, maybe it was because they didn't have running backs. That could have certainly been it. But I also don't think that, like, they ran the ball like 18 total times or something like that among their running backs. So it was crazy splits there. And I probably see them doing that again. Now, on the other side, where I think I disagree with Clark here is a little bit that the Lions defense is definitely healthier than they have been, but that doesn't mean, I mean, since they're bye, they've been getting absolutely shredded from a volume perspective and total and an efficiency perspective. 8.78 yards per attempt, 32nd in EPA per dropback since they're bye, 30th in success rate, 299 passing yards per game. I mean, some of that is volume based for sure, but I also just don't think that they're that good either. And it's one of those things where I don't want to put too much stock in what we saw last time. So Bucs and the Lions played last time. Baker Mayfield played terrible. He had like 200 yards, was completed like, 60% of his passes. But we said the exact same thing about the Eagles last time. And it was like, well, he didn't play all that good last time. The Eagles were able to run the ball in a Bucs defense that's been really good against the run almost all year. And then the inverse happened because of what we've seen for the last few weeks. And this is one of the prime examples here where I think that the Bucs will be able to maybe not have an awesome day, like not 400 yards, passing yards, but I think, like Baker Mayfield can be successful enough to keep them close. So I lean Bucs +6 for a couple of those reasons here. If they're able to get home with their blitz, and if they're able to have some success passing the ball here, I can see Clark's angle on them, definitely not being as bad as the stats that I laid out in their current iteration because they're healthier, but I still think that they're, not very good.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that, there's like, even in this game too, to Clark's point in the over, like a ton of passing, which obviously leads to a lot of plays, stopping your clock, more opportunities, more efficient way to play offense, 20-6. So like, even playing the more efficient way and Goff cooking essentially, right? Because again, they weren't going to hand to Craig Reynolds all game. It was basically like, all right, let's get the ball to Amon-Ra, who ate, I think, like 12 balls for 120 something yards or whatever. And I imagine that's another spot for them in the slot, especially when they run 3 wide. He'll be a feature of this offense, but like still probably feels like a little bit too many points. I'm just interested to see what their game plan is. If last week's pass rate stuff was sticky, because when you look at Detroit in terms of like first down in the first half of games, and right, that's like a smaller split, but we know at that point in time, the game is still undecided for the most part. The Lions defensively are second in rush D EPA per play, like top 5 in success rate. In the same time, in terms of pass defense, they are 28th in passing success rate allowed. It's how you beat them. So hopefully the Bucs don't get into this run pass scenario where like they led the league in run pass this season. So last week was a change. Yeah. So hopefully that's what they do, and that makes this competitive. Otherwise, I think this could kind of get away from them. So I think Connor needs that to happen too with the 6 points. But Clark, what else you got?
Give me all the run pass. The other thing is, talking about prisoner of the moment, I think that does apply to Baker Mayfield, right? We have a long career of Baker Mayfield being a mediocre quarterback, and he's been playing his best football in the last few weeks. And people are like, or not, I guess last, half of the season. And people are all excited about Baker Mayfield's, he's established himself as the, he's a full-time starter now, all that kind of stuff. And we've seen this before. We have evidence, last time they played the Lions, there's all these videos going around of they were so close on these deep balls, and this one would have been a touchdown if it didn't get batted at the line of scrimmage. Guess what? Baker Mayfield gets his passes batted at the line of scrimmage all the time. Guess what? Baker Mayfield misses downfield all the time. Like, these are not aberrations. That's who Baker Mayfield is. So I think there's a little bit of sort of optimism that's generated from recency bias here, and I think Baker Mayfield is still an average at best quarterback. And that's coming from someone who's been pro Baker his entire career. Like, he's finally playing the way that I think he's capable of. But what tends to happen is it swings in the other direction, and people forget that like he's actually been pretty bad a lot of his career. So
he's not very good, but I don't think he's very good. So.
Yeah, and we're getting 48.5 in a game with Baker Mayfield and Jared Goff as the quarterbacks. Like, no.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see what they do. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, comment here, backing up Clark, Stafford, Puka, Baker, and Evans. I think that's what you touched on earlier too.
Yeah, without a doubt. They're going to be a spot where they have to make a decision. It's going to be hard to not keep Baker. And you can get in a spot where like now all of a sudden you've extended Baker. Hopefully maybe he gets a Geno Smith deal, which again, not great.
That'd be right.
You got to give
That'd
him
be right.
something, right? Yeah.
Yeah. He's played
Best
really
case
well.
scenario
His
for him.
scrambling has been better than it's ever been.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah, I'm kind of with Clark. My favorite playing game would probably be the under. Feels like too many points. I maybe would lean Lions, but I don't have necessarily an appetite for laying this many points. But yeah, props. We'll attack it through props. So
we're all over the
all
board
right.
in this.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting game. I mean, I think there's a lot depending on how there's a lot of assumption of rational coaching stuff going on that I think is massively impactful to the handicap, and we just don't know what's going to happen until the ball gets rolled out there. So. All right, the creme de la creme, at least on paper, Kansas City at Buffalo. You have heard it by now, and I think it's truly wild that this is Patrick Mahomes' first road playoff game in his career, a testament to how strong they've been and consistent that they've been since he has taken over there. And again, another rematch. We saw this recently. This is back in mid-December. It was week 14, 20-17 win for the Bills in Kansas City. We've seen high leverage games between these two clubs every year since Allen and Mahomes have been in the league. To me, there aren't a lot of nuanced X's and O's here. It feels like the right number. We've kind of touched and tickled 3 a little bit. We've had some buyback. We look like we might be moving there again with the way it's kind of Buffalo -2.5. It's juiced out in some spots, so we could be going to 3, which I think is interesting. I think worth noting that Isaiah Pacheco was not a part of this game back in week 14 when they met. Clark, I'll let you get the floor here first for Chiefs and Bills.
Yeah, I mean, the Bills own the Chiefs in the regular season and the Chiefs own the Bills in the playoffs. That's the way it's been, right? I actually make this game about 1.5 for the Bills, so I do see a little bit of value on the Chiefs, especially once it touches that 3. I've been wrestling with the market all week. Every time it's gone to 3, I've taken a piece because I do think that giving 3 points to Patrick Mahomes, I understand everyone's like, well, they haven't looked as good this year, the receivers, this and that, and all that kind of stuff. I'm grading every snap, and I still have the Chiefs as the number 2 or number 3 offense in the NFL this year only. They are not a disaster on offense. It's just been high leverage plays, the drop from MVS, the penalty on Kadarius Toney to getting the touchdown, things like that have just come at the wrong time. Early in the season, there were more key drops, and I do think that they've struggled in the red zone. Don't get me wrong, they haven't been as good as they've been in the past, but this is still Patrick Mahomes. This is still Andy Reid. This is still the Chiefs. They are the most experienced and competent offense in the NFL until proven otherwise. When the playoffs come, they play their best football, and I think that they can compete with the Bills here. And that would be true even if the Bills weren't injured all down the defense. Some of these guys are probably going to come back. Rizzo Douglas will probably come back, but they lost another secondary player. He got carted off, and then it was well, he's got an ankle sprain, so maybe he'll play. I don't know. Maybe he won't be 100%. Linebackers are hurt. And then they weren't able to get pressure on Mason Rudolph last week. And Mason Rudolph, as a result, just picked him apart over the middle, 8 yards, 10 yards here, almost launched a comeback against the Bills. So this defense is not set up to succeed against Patrick Mahomes. And I think it's just – I don't like oversimplifying handicaps. I want to be able to find the non-obvious angle, but it's Patrick Mahomes as an underdog in the playoffs. Sign me up. Simple as that.
Yeah, the injuries are a big piece of it because we have concussions in secondary. Christian Benford, we had a bunch of guys, main starters, go down there. Or even some guys that weren't active last week heading into it. So that's a real problem on the Bills side. So. It's definitely a part of. We need to see how that shakes out here as the week goes on. Connor, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, it's super interesting because I think that we probably see the Bills skew run heavy here against the Chiefs defense. That their pass defense has been playing really well. Their run defense has been, pretty average or below average, depending on the metrics you're looking at. But the issue that I ran into when I was kind of digging more is that the Bills, especially under Joe Brady, have run a lot of the man gap concepts. They run that one of the highest rates in the league. The Chiefs are third in defending that in the league. So they're allowing the third best, lowest success rate, against those concepts, which is, over half the time when they're running that. And so I think that's an interesting point there is that maybe if they're able to stop the run, I just think it could be a really difficult here for this Buffalo Bills team to move the ball consistently compared to what we've seen. And then on the other side, with all the injuries, I can see Kansas City kind of being a power run team too. Like if they don't have to pass the ball consistently, if they don't have the, the juice and the weapons that they used to, like leaning into the run and then consistently converting on third down when they need to. Like, I mean, Mahomes is very capable of doing that. Like if he needs to be the best game manager in the world, he can do that if he needs to. And so I think that this is pretty interesting here for Kansas City. Like I kind of like them outright with all the injuries. I mean, even if like some of those guys still play, like I think you're just still looking at a spot where this Buffalo defense, I thought was overrated in the middle of the season. They got a lot of guys back. I felt really good about them heading into last week. And then now I don't feel very good about them at all. And so I think this is one of those spots where just injuries are piling up. I don't know how they're going to stop the Chiefs run defense or the run offense consistently. And I think Mahomes will still have some success here.
Yeah, the injuries again. I think it's a massive, massive part of the handicap. Yeah, it's should be a great game. I love seeing, just two absolute dogs like this at quarterback in playoff games, high leverage playoff games. I mean, how can you not be romantic about football in this spot to end the weekend with these two guys going back? It's just going to be awesome. And yeah, this will be a game that I just out of all the three in terms of sides and totals, I probably have the least conviction. I kind of with you guys, and I think you make a good job handicapping. There'll probably be a lean to the Chiefs, especially if the Bills injury report doesn't shake out very well. I think they're going to have an issue. But maybe we're also talking about an under here where both these teams probably lean run heavy and just you could have these like, which you never would have thought would be the scenario, but you could have these like 10, 12 play drives and all of a sudden it's, you're touching the ball twice a half. It gets a little bit harder to kind of push the score. So yeah, it's going to be great football.
Given the size of my futures exposure on the Bills, if the Bills can win by 1 or 2 points, I will be dancing around my house. And I'm a Chiefs fan, and I say that because money rules, right? I will be just thrilled. I know that's such a tiny window to middle there, but it's one of those things where part of my handicap is the Chiefs could knock off the Bills finally and kill that future that's been getting value every week since I bet it. But I do think the Chiefs are definitely live and have a good shot at winning this. It's just Patrick Mahomes just makes those plays, whether it's a scramble or whatever, like he turns it on. And I don't even think receiver drops, they happen, but they're not predictive. So I don't think that we should say, well, a receiver is going to drop a key pass. We don't know that. They're still NFL receivers. Like shouldn't count on that in your handicap. I say that, and then someone's going to drop the game winner.
It's super interesting because the last time they played, 42 pass attempts for Josh Allen, 43 pass attempts for Patrick Mahomes. So, I've kind of penciled in like just forgetting about that game. Like, what have we seen from them the last few weeks? What do we think their optimal strategy is? I'm like, oh, they'll probably go run heavy. Then you look back at that game, you're like, what happened? So the Chiefs didn't have Isaiah Pacheco. I think that's really important. It was just CEH. So I think that kind of played their hand. They're like, all right, we're not running with this bum. He's not capable of being power running back. And the other side, Josh Allen and Joe Brady, this is one of the games where James Cook was super involved in the receiving game, 5 for 83 and a touchdown. So I think that they kind of switched up from a, maybe running game to just a lot of short passing, but I'm not really sure that was optimal. I mean, 23 or 42 passes completed, 1 touchdown, 1 pick, 3 sacks. I don't know. I could totally see them being like, you know what, that didn't really work all that well. So we're going to switch the game around here, try and run the ball, control the clock. So I don't know. I think that's actually going to be probably one of my biggest things live is if you see that from both sides, I could very easily bet an under here pretty quick, but pre-flop, it could very easily just be like a barn burner as well. So for me, it's kind of just like a stay away on that end.
Yeah.
You can always be like that. The game where they scored
play early.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say they had that one game where they scored 28 in the last 2 minutes or something a couple years ago.
God.
You got these two quarterbacks capable of anything.
True.
That was, I rewatched that so many times, just like the last, made my wife rewatch it with me and my son, look at this. This is a crazy end. At the time we had an older DVR, kept in the DVR, just watching the summer. This is great. Let's watch this again. Yeah.
DVR.
Well,
Boomer.
that was YouTube TV, direct TV, DVRs are, not a thing for me anymore. So yeah. Someone in the chat mentioned too, Mahomes rushing over. Yeah. Mahomes rushing over.
Yeah. That dropped at 24.5 on FanDuel. I played it. I don't know. I think you played it too.
This wasn't readily available, so we couldn't push it out for subscribers, but we were talking about it in the chat. So hopefully subs got it because it was 37 or 27, 28 in other spots. But yeah, FanDuel as they typically do.
Which is still, a lean over, but 24. That's potentially another carry. That's
Yeah.
I just love watching Mahomes in a playoff game. Like his level of focus is so intense. Like when his helmet cracked, he's just like all business, like getting back in the game. Like he doesn't give. He's so focused on winning. It's unbelievable, and it comes out in weird ways. And one of those ways is scrambling to get that first down. And I think that's going to come on and play.
Yeah. Should be good. Good week of football. A good way to wrap it up there too. So appreciate everyone hanging out with us. Before you leave, make sure you hit the thumbs up. Make sure you hit subscribe. Come back on Friday to get some of the prop bets with Connor, myself, and Hyslop. We'll be back here continuing while there's football. We will be here. Actually, what am I talking about? We did a show every week last season as well. So even when football stops, they will still be moving the lines every week. We'll be talking about stuff in the offseason. So hit the subscribe button. Continue to hang out with us, and we will be back next week. For Connor and Clark, I'm Ryan. We'll see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.